All right, thanks very much, Jim. Thanks everybody for coming along today and everybody watching on the web over there. I guess I'll let the guitar do the talking for a start. Okay, we're going to go over in a little while. There was a reason we played that, and we're going to talk about the projection and such of these guitars. So that there is one of the latest and greatest of the ones I've made. For those of you who've known me a while, you know this is pretty much what I do. It's a great privilege to be able to talk about guitars in front of some of my colleagues that shout me down quite often because I'm always talking about them, living in them, breathing them. Thanks, Mark. So today's talk is titled Making Guitars with a Physics Mind. And it was really interesting putting this presentation together, the realisation, I guess, that I've come to find out about myself and the sort of things that I do when I'm making guitars. And I've seemed to have absorbed a lot of stuff through my skin and not able to sort of quantify or talk about the principles that I'm discovering and trying to apply in the way I make these things. And a great example of that is if I ask the audience here, what is it like to see the colour red? And you really can't put that into words. But I guess with a physics mind, oh yeah, of course, colours have different wavelengths and red has a particular wavelength that it reflects off objects and therefore we see red. It still doesn't answer that question, what do we feel or see when we see the colour red? It's really hard to describe that. And so what I've discovered in putting this presentation together is the physics has allowed me a language now to describe some of the things that I'm doing. So that's a very important point. It's not like I pull apart the guitar and quantify every part of it, tune everything to certain resonant frequencies and thinking this is a great way of going and then put it back together. I actually make the guitars really based on intuition and I guess empirical knowledge that I've gained from previous manufacturers who share their knowledge via books or internets and things like that. And once I've absorbed that and know what I'm doing, I can then quantify what I'm actually really doing in physics terms. So that's a fairly important distinction, that I'm not just simply making things by formulas. That's my cave there. That's where you can find me between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock every morning of the week, and a lot of times on weekends and evenings as well. We'll talk about string vibrations because after all that's what we use to put the energy into a guitar body. If we just had a string on its own, it won't make much sound at all. And that's directly related to the amount of air that it will move. The string's a fairly thin thing, it can't move much air, so we don't hear much. A guitar isn't an amplifier of the sound. That's a really bad term to use. It certainly doesn't do that. In fact, a guitar is a real waster of the energy budget that you put into it with the string's energy. It really does waste that energy. But we try as best as possible as guitar makers to make most efficient use of the energy that you have got there, and hopefully not too much of that is wasted. So in broad terms, this is just an introduction. The guitar will resonate at a whole spectrum of frequencies, and the whole of the guitar will vibrate. As a player on a really well-made, handmade instrument, you'll feel the neck moving, you'll feel the back moving. The whole of that guitar is actually in motion at the time. Another thing that happens as well is it goes in and out like a bellows, and so it's like an air pump. And so the sound also emanates from the sound hole as well. So it's radiating from the surfaces of the guitar, and it's also coming out of the hole there. Some basic physics here. How do strings vibrate? This does lead on to other aspects. We're probably very familiar with things like fundamentals, first overtones, second overtones and third overtones. And this is something I'll be talking about later. And we can actually force those modes on a guitar. If I was to go halfway between the guitar here and pluck the string right in its centre, funnily enough there's two dots being put on there for the player to know that. Have a listen to the sound. Apart from a lot of buzzing, I can't stop that because I'm really exciting the string at its middle here. It's a very round tone. If I pluck the string right at the back now, what I'm doing actually is I'm exciting first, second, third and higher overtones to the string sound. So that would sound like this, compared with something up here. So you can immediately see there's a difference in the way you play the guitar, and of course some players might even strum the guitar halfway along the neck for particular sounds and effects as opposed to further back here. So the player themselves actually influence quite a bit what the guitar will sound like. in fact, extraordinary amount. You don't just get a fundamental, you don't just get a first overtone, you get a whole mix of those. And so if we just took, for instance, the first overtone and fourth, that would be a resultant waveform, an algebraic addition of those two. And of course, there's a long series of these harmonics, and depending on the type of manufacture of the string, depends on what kind of harmonics you might expect on that string, and also the weight of that. It's the harmonic series that's responsible for the unique sound quality of different instruments. Did I bring it along? I just invite everybody at the moment to indulge me just to... it's too late now because you've probably seen at the front what I've got. If you can just close your eyes for a minute, I just want to play a note on a particular instrument and see if you can tell me what kind of instrument's making this tone. Well, it's not a strangled cat at all, is it? Okay, so without even seeing that instrument, hopefully those at the back never saw that, you can tell instantly with that kind of harmonic spectra that that thing is a violin. Instantly, you know that. If we look at a guitar, where does all this transfer of energy happen? It happens at the place called the bridge, and also the saddle is that little white piece sitting in there, and high quality instruments will make that out of bone. And so it's the bridge and the saddle that essentially are the energy transferring components of the guitar, where the first bit of energy comes from the string and goes into the guitar body itself. They tug at that bridge with their unique harmonic spectra. That's not to say the guitar's going to vibrate at that unique harmonic spectra at all. It's just that's what's available in its energy budget to then be distributed around the guitar in whatever way that particular guitar will respond. Okay, so we'll go back a few steps now, and I'll work back up to the slide that we just showed. Wood is the engineering material you use, and wood is always on the move. It's a very, very humid day today, and I had to retune all of these instruments because they move around. Wood will absorb the moisture in the atmosphere, and similarly it will dry out. And so the parts of the guitar will actually distort with these different humidities. When you go to Bunnings, have a look at the top plank there, plank number 1, that's nice and buckled and bowed. Strangely enough, Bunnings have quite a number of those planks in Jarrah and things like pine for sale. What the wood does is it actually cups away from the centre of the tree. So if you ever see something, a wood bending like that, on the bottom of the radius, you know that's the bit that was closest to the core of the tree. And the reason being that the wood will shrink primarily between its growth rings. The kind of wood you want to make a guitar out of is the plank indicated by number 2 over there. That plank there is what's known as quarter sawn wood. If we were to slice that log into quarters and then take one of the a board off the face of the quarter, so we'd slice it into quarters down this way, then we've taken a board off one of the quarters, the only way that piece of wood can move now is in and out. It can't flex up or down and bow, it only can go in and out with moisture. So that's a reasonably stable bit of wood. I've brought along a few bits of wood just to show you what I mean. This is a bit I bought from Bunnings. Isn't that lovely clear timber? Not really, knots all over the place, but you can't really expect much else out of this. This is pine wood. And when I go purchase wood, I do look very carefully at the ends of the grains, and just here, and it's very hard to see, is the core of the tree. This is the centre here. And out here are the growth rings radiating out from that. So this particular piece of wood, even though I bought it as a throwaway piece for some of the things I was doing, I made sure it was at least quarter sawn. So I went through the stacks of wood and got a bit that, okay, it has a few knots on, but at least this is going to stay relatively flat for me. I think I'll pick that up in a minute. We'll just show you some other wood. This is the kind of wood that you hunt through wood stacks for as a guitar maker. You can see that I can't really see any discernible end grain here. It's very hard to know what's going on, and usually if I go to these wood yards, I'll ask if I can saw a little piece off the end or bring my plane along and just plane the end so that I can have a look here. And this particular piece of wood, even though no one in their right mind would pay $21 for something that's so rotten, is an excellent piece of guitar wood. We'll see that shortly. And for me, this heartens me. I know this was a fallen tree that they've now reclaimed from the forest, so we're not just tearing up tropical hardwoods there for that piece. Why do you get such poor cuts in wood? Of course, it's got to be sawn for economics. So you don't want to go wastefully sawing wood in quarters. It's a very wasteful way to do things. And they have come up with various schemes. I've just illustrated some here for cutting these woods and trying to maximise I guess, the yield from the wood. And if you look through all of those pictures, you could probably see quite a few planks in all those different cutting methods that would yield suitable wood for guitar making. So you do spend a lot of time hunting through stacks of wood, annoying these wood keepers, and going through their stack again and again and again. As well as being quarter sawn, it's an interesting phenomenon of trees that they aren't always straight grained. What we mean by straight grained is that the tree has just grown up with no twists in it. This is a reasonably rare phenomena. I've got two street trees out the front of our house. They're both weeping peppermints. One is ramrod straight, no problem at all. And the other has an extraordinary twist on it. So these were two trees grown at exactly the same, planted at the same time, grown in the same location, same soil, same watering, and yet they have such different characteristics. Why they do this is they actually follow the sun. So in the southern hemisphere here, a tree that's looking at a northern facing sun will follow that sun and track it through the day. Well, it disappears. Oh, here it is again. And it'll follow and track that and actually grow a twist in an anti-clockwise fashion. Guess what happens in the northern hemisphere? The opposite. And why are tropical hardwoods sometimes so valuable and stable? It's because they twist one way and then another. And so they'll just twist back and forward and work their way up and be very, very straight grained for a long distance up their trunks. So as best as possible, if you can, you'll actually cut wood for guitars out of split billets. So someone's cleaved it with an axe, that's followed the natural split line, and then you resaw the board to follow those lines. And that will yield very, very stable wood. Woods used for guitars ideally have a very high stiffness to weight ratio. And that's why I've hung on to these two bits of wood here. So here's our Bunnings pine. We're a student, we want to make a guitar, so we'll buy some cheaper wood and see what it might sound like. So if I grab the wood, usually about a third down its length, and just give it a nice rap with my fist, you can usually see the sort of tones it might produce. That's quite subdued. I didn't get that tone this morning, that's not bad. And then we'll grab our piece of rosewood and try and do a similar thing to that. And this will rattle around, there's lots of rot in this one. The sustain in that's a lot more, even though, as I say, that there's a lot of rattling around there. So I go around the wood yards, not only planing their bits of wood, sawing off the ends and looking at the end grain, but I go around there bashing them with my fist as well. What I am listening for is things like, you hear that rattle, I'm listening for cracks also in the billets of wood. We don't want to have any hidden cracks in there. But the amount of sustain in that wood would tell me this will make a great guitar back and side set. The wood that's illustrated over there in the picture's been all sawn up by me now, but this is all wood I've selected for back and side sets using exactly that principle. So I've gone to the wood show, as it turned out in Perth, purchased those just by bashing them and seeing if they were resonant or not. So rather than sticking to traditional timbers, I go out and just look for physical properties of the timber. I'm not particularly interested in reputations of historic woods. So if you want to find stiffness to weight ratios, this is how you can start to quantify some of these things. You basically look at the density of the wood and its modulus of elasticity. And I've illustrated these four woods in particular because they are the premium and premier woods used in the guitar building industry. Spruce, whether it's Sitka spruce or Engelmann spruce or all sorts of subspecies, alpine spruce from Europe, is a very, very good soundboard material. And far and away, although the numbers don't suggest far and away, it is the best stiffness to weight ratio you could ever get in the wood family. So it's just like balsa wood, it's extremely soft. Trust me, you have a little sand grit or grain on your bench when you're working it and put it down on top and it'll indent into that very nicely. So it's a very soft wood but extraordinarily stiff and extremely resonant. So that's used for the soundboards for pianos, for soundboards for violins and soundboards for a whole host of musical instruments. A good second, a very popular timber is Western red cedar. We actually have an example of some here. This is a cedar soundboard here that's been manufactured at the moment. This just has a more subdued colour, not as bright white, and this imparts quite a lot of warmth to the guitar. It's not as stiff as the spruce, and so the bass notes here, it's easy to get a good bass sound out of something like Western red cedar. So that's usually used for lower tension instruments. You wouldn't put that in a high tension instrument at all. And back and sides woods are the two bottom ones here. Mahogany, nowadays Brazilian mahogany is CITES certified, so it's an endangered species. It's no longer able to be exported from Brazil and South America. Whatever's around is around now. I was very fortunate recently to purchase some. It wasn't very large, but I've made some necks recently out of this timber. Very nice timber to work, and you can see why it was so revered, but unfortunately so heavily forested, logged, and it's pretty much all gone now. So that's a very, very good timber to use. But there's a number of mahogany variants that are very good. African mahogany and some of the Asian species are very good. But this is the old Brazilian version here, and you can see its stiffness to weight ratio is quite high. The premium wood by far for back and side material is rosewood, and in particular would be Brazilian rosewood. That was site certified in 1972. So it's pretty rare to find a guitar nowadays, or to find that wood. If you do, they're actually cutting it out of old tree stumps. And so the sort of grain, the nice straight grain, the follow the split line sort of rules, they're out the window. What they're relying on there is that people will buy something that you can't get anymore. And there's a lot of mystique associated with that wood. But personally, I would never make a guitar out of it. It would be way too risky. As an example, here's a very similar timber. I've had this for years, and I wanted to make a guitar out of it. And this was a set of sides I made. And this is the sort of thing you might expect out of Brazilian rosewood. It looks reasonably straight and clear grain, but it's certainly not. And this thing is that cranky, you couldn't bend this thing with any sort of luck. And I've just put this aside as a bit of a bad loss. So it was a shame. I had a big board of it all cut up, and I've still got it all cut up, and it's going to remain cut up. So not made into guitars at all. Okay, guitar anatomy. What's inside a guitar? Someone recently was very surprised when I told them that what you see on the outside of the guitar really isn't much to do with what makes and produces the sound. And when they poked their head inside the guitar, they were astounded to see the amount of woodwork that goes on inside there. And to be honest, what's under the hood is the most important part of the guitar. Here's a guitar I haven't prepared earlier because it's still in pieces. Bob Coleman down the back's about to become very intimately acquainted with this guitar. This is his guitar. So here's the internal structure here that I've been working on for him. These are the struts or the braces, and we'll go over their function in a minute. And there's a few little hacks and chisel marks. It hasn't quite been finished yet. But this is a guitar top that I'm slowly carving away the braces to get a nice tap tone on it. Doesn't sound very much to you guys, but last weekend this was extremely stiff because the braces weren't carved, and it's slowly opening up. I've got to now decide how much wood to take away from this before it's opened up enough. And you'll see shortly, if I open it up too much, it'll actually break. Here's the back of the guitar. These braces haven't been shaped, they're still in their rectangular form. And even so, I don't know what that truck's doing out there, you can still get a reasonable tap tone from something like that that still hasn't been carved. Okay, apparently we're okay. Oh, there we are. Very good, Glenn. Thank you very much for your assistance. So we're going in. So there's the struts you see along the back. Have a look how I've tucked those in under those linings there. So those back braces are actually coupled to the sides of the guitar and held quite firmly. There's the back block, the big piece you put the strap into. There's another one tucked in over there. There's another one. Oh, nice woodwork, Dom. Very good. The bit you see with all the little cuts, the bit I'm coming really close to now, is called kerfed lining. We'll see a slide of that later, and that's actually quite a critical part of the guitar. Every one of those cuts, believe it or not, is almost cut through that piece of wood, but not quite, and it's all done by hand. So it's a very enjoyable experience making kerfed lining, and I think Bob Loss here has had a turn at that, and we'd have to agree that that's just fantastic fun. If we just back up a bit, I might have to do a bit of bending. Ease up. We can just see the tops there of some of those soundboard braces. Oh, there's another scheme for making sure that they're anchored quite nicely, and this is the way we do it on the tops. We actually stick one of those little kerfed lining blocks on top of the brace to hold it in there quite firmly. It's an important point of the guitar as well, how thick that little bit of brace is that goes into those linings in there. And I think if we back, no, we're not going to see that. No, I thought we might be able to see the strings coming in. Okay, so there's a little bit of a different way to look in the guitar. Oh, if this works, I'll be amazed. Fantastic. Smooth as. Okay, here's one I did prepare earlier. What I do when I make guitars like these things, this is a cutaway, but in particular it's a Venetian cutaway rather than, I don't know why they call it a Venetian cutaway. A Florentine cutaway has a smooth flowing curve that you bend into it. These supposedly are harder to make, and I guess I have to concur, they are fairly difficult to get right and make everything look nice and crisp. And what I've done when I usually make the guitar as a solid guitar first and actually hack into the side and cut that part out. And here that allowed me, you can just see the bottom edge down there of where I've cut it out, that allowed me to poke a camera in there and get quite artistic. So you can see the internal structures of that one there. This is about to be strung up and working, so those braces there at the correct thickness and weights and resonance and everything that I wanted about them. The finish has also been put on as well, so I'll refinish after I've put the cutaway in there. So I can judge, I could have stuck my hand in after this, after cutting it, and actually adjusted or taken some wood away from those braces if I'd chosen to. So it does allow a little bit of a luxury that way. Here's another look at them when the backs are not on. So this is the Soundboard bracing. This is specifically for steel string guitars now. It's about 700 newtons of tension, so about the standard physics person, that's 70 kilograms, standing on a rope, hanging off that bridge for the life of the guitar. So it just gives you an appreciation of how much force is on the guitar top. And it turns out you don't even need those braces. You can make a guitar without the braces whatsoever. So that's quite a surprise, I'm sure, for a lot of people. What would it sound like? Horrible. What would it last like? Probably a month or two before it would collapse in on itself. So it wouldn't hold up to long-term tension and it wouldn't sound very good at all. Why is that? Well, most importantly, on the right of the image there, braces increase the stability of the top, that's very important, but most importantly, they control the modes of vibration of the top. And this is something that certainly I've learnt since my previous talk here in the physics department, that's really the main purpose of braces and brace schemes, is to control the modes or the way the top will vibrate. Yeah, sure, it also has the secondary function of keeping them held up over a long-term tension, but it's really the modes of vibration that's very, very important. What am I talking about? Modes. This is a bit of a go at trying to have a graphic to show what modes are. And so if you can imagine red being out perhaps and blue being in, this is the type of oscillation that the monopole mode is on the guitar. So that's in and out type of bellows movement, and this is where we get the sound coming out of the sound hole, sort of Helmholtz resonator style. The monopole mode in steel string guitars, because they're made of jangly steel, is a very important one to get right. What we're trying to do in steel string construction is increase the bass response. And if you make the monopole large, a big monopole where the whole thing can move in and out as a complete and total unit, then you can increase the bass response and get a nice rich bass response on the guitar. So the monopole is certainly something that I'm constantly striving towards increasing. There's two other main types. This is the cross dipole mode, where you've actually got the bridge teetering on itself, going backwards and forwards. And this is extremely important in nylon and classical string guitars. This is the mode that they primarily are interested in. Nylon strung guitars have great bass response. The thing they struggle for is treble response. And so this mode here gives a great treble response, and also actually, as it turns out, aids in projection. If I play a guitar a long way from somebody and they can hear it very clear, then you know that we've got the cross dipole mode very active on that particular guitar. These aren't exclusive of each other, just as the harmonic spectra of frequencies weren't exclusive. We don't just get the fundamental mode. We get a whole mixture of these modes on any one guitar top. And then the final one is the long dipole mode. This one's a bit difficult to get going because of the way you've orientated the wood. You've put a lot of stiffness in that area. And so the long dipole mode, where the bridge teeters back and forward on itself, is a hard one to try and enhance. If you try and enhance that one, you tend to weaken the structure a little bit, and over a long term the guitar will fall apart. So that's not going to be a very good one. But that one is prevalent and is used. So remember, there's a mix of all of those, but just like we had the fundamental and the first overtone, we've also got similarly fundamentals and first overtones of these, of the dipole modes, not of the monopole. So we can also get the top breaking up into with 2 nodes or 3 nodes or 4 nodes, etc. And so actually the movement of the top on a guitar is actually quite chaotic. It's a very chaotic thing indeed. And remembering that, this is the sort of bracing scheme we've got. So it's not a homogeneous plate. We've got braces placed in very specific places here to enhance very specific modes. So we'll just have a quick look at nylon string soundboard bracing. And if you remember, what they want is the cross dipole. They want the bridge to rock backward and forward on each other. Look at all the bracing schemes. They all brace in that long fashion. They all want the bridge. They want to enhance that bridge to move backwards and forwards. Interestingly, you might not intuitively know, but down the bottom right-hand side is a guy who lives in Esperance, Smallman, and he has this lattice brace arrangement. He has probably some of the more innovative ideas on classical guitars, but his bracing system as well very much enhances that dipole, and he's very aware of that as well. So it's not as intuitive on his style of bracing, but that's what he's doing. So that's the realm of classical guitar building, nylon strung guitars. That's not my realm. My realm is steel string construction and very specific kinds of steel strings as well. This is the bracing pattern. It's not the only bracing pattern you can use, but this is the bracing pattern that I base everything that I do on. It's known as the X brace pattern, mostly because of the two main braces along there, the two main X's. The good thing about this bracing system in steel string guitars is it really does tie the whole structure together. So to get that monopole mode going, it's very easy to do. The thing you see on the top of the guitars here, the brown thing, is the most important brace on the guitar. It's the only one that's on the outside too. But this bridge here actually ties those legs of that X brace together by its exact placement. So you can see that on the diagram. There's a bridge plate and there's a little tiny outline of the bridge itself there. And if you were making a gate or some sort of a structure at home and you had two crossed pieces of wood, wouldn't it be advantageous to stick something across to tie those things together? So it's able to tie that together and get that monopole mode going really nicely. But the good thing about the X brace is we can open and close up the X, not by much, by very minute amounts, and we can actually increase the amount of long dipole or cross dipole modes that occur on there. And we have auxiliary braces. They're just called finger braces, although these are called Soundboard braces. I just call them finger braces that come off here. And they're also important, as well as the lower transverse braces, in just helping control some of the spectra that we see. If we have a look at this guitar, this is actually a small body guitar, so we'll just go back to that Soundboard. And it's a very lightweight cedar top that can't handle much string tension. And what I've done here is modified a little bit what we might see over on the slide over there. So I've eliminated a second finger brace from here. I don't want to stiffen this top up at all. And I've only got one transverse brace, and look at the orientation I've put it rather than having the hang right down to the base of the guitar down here. So what I'm trying to do as much as possible with this guitar, it's a small body, and I'm going to be fighting getting a good bass tone. So I'm trying to open up the top a little bit more artificially by removing any weight down here so that the thing can get a bit of a long dipole, but hopefully a really good monopole movement. So hopefully I've tied the structure together really nicely with the arrangement of braces there. So the rest of voicing this top, as it's known, is just removing a little bit extra wood. I'm almost there now, until I can get a really pleasing tap tone. And although this is not fixed at the sides like it would be in a guitar, this gives you a quantifiable way of knowing, have you reached your target tone? Interestingly, with braces, the buzzword in braces is let's get a guitar that has scalloped braces. And so many guitar companies offer scalloped braces. What happened there was, in a factory setting, the guys would put the guitar together slightly overbuilt, a little bit heavier than it needed to be. They would string it up and go, this guitar's a bit dead. They'd reach in the sound hole with their planes and they would plane away a little bit of the braces. And they would just weaken those braces up and string it up again and try it again until they got it right. And so by slavishly copying what people saw when they opened up the guitars and saw these braces were scalloped, it's false. You don't need to scallop braces at all. What you should be doing is getting very skilled at getting a very nice slim taper on the braces in the first place. So I've yet to have any of the guitars I've made where I've thought, gee, I really need to get my hand in there and start to carve away some of these braces. So that was in a factory setting where basically they assume all components are the same. So some guitars clearly won't be the same as others. Going back, delving into the physics. Why do I make the braces, or I just know that you need to make them taller than they are instead of really squat fat ones? Basic physics can tell you. If we look at the brace on the left-hand side, if we make it twice as wide, we get twice the stiffness. But there's a squared rule if we make it twice as high. Sorry, it's a cube rule. Yara, pick me up on that, would you? Hey? It's a cube rule, so we get 8 times the stiffness. So when I'm mucking around now, removing a little bit of wood here, I can do a lot of damage very quickly. And one thing in guitar making I've realised over the years in making many guitars is you can't put the wood back on again. And so when you're at this almost target thickness here, it's very much a slow process of removing a bit of wood and testing it again. You don't really want to try and put that wood back on. It's a really hard thing. I've had one guitar in the history of making where I've basically run this hole through my thickness sander and taken all the braces off again and started again. So it went a little bit too far on that particular one. So, yeah. So we like high braces, and the reason is we get a lot of stiffness. And the same happens with the thicknesses of the tops as well. So if we make the top twice as thick, it'll have quite a lot more stiffness than if we make it only a little bit stiff, a bit thicker. Domed tops and backs are a little bit of a current trend in instruments. We've actually got our mysterious instrument that I had under here. This is a violin kit I put together. I wouldn't say I made it. I just glued the components together that I bought. And it's well known in the violin world that they carve a dome into their instruments for strength. So these guys don't have to worry too much about the internal bracing and structures. They don't have complicated bracing schemes here. What they have is just a single tone bar run down the middle, and that just controls some of the modes of vibration on a violin. The back is unstrutted, so it's just carved out of maple, and the top is carved out of spruce. So this is a well-known way of getting larger instruments like violas and double basses to contain the stress here that's put on by the bridge. So it's a very strong way of building instruments. But what you can do in a steel string sense is impart a bit of a dome to your instruments, and this is the one I played first off, is a good example of that. And it might be a bit difficult to see, but built into this guitar has been a radius, and I'm sorry to use these units, but it's a 40-foot radius, and in the back of the guitar has been built in a radius 28 feet. So you do the math if you like the metric system. And this has been done specifically to increase the stiffnesses of the woods. If I can increase the stiffness of the top of guitars, I can remove a lot of the wood that I'm using in the bracing structure purely as a structural element. I can then concentrate on using the braces as more controlling in the mode element. So they're just simple lightweight things that are almost fixing the top in certain positions in that case. So earlier constructions I've made and still do a little bit, things like this guy here. That's a true flat string, a flat top guitar. So that has a completely flat top on it, but as it turns out you tend to dome the backs as part of the manufacturing process. So it's possible to make guitars with flat tops as well. They sound just as good. It's just that I have to be mindful now that it has to be a bit more structural with my bracing system rather than looking at the sound that I'm getting out of the instrument. Okay, I just wanted to show, how do I do it? How do I put a dome into instruments? There's Bob Coleman's back there, and this has a dome put in it already like this. I have for this particular one's 28-foot radius dish that it's coated completely in sandpaper, and each of these braces I put it on the dish where it will sit on the guitar and sand the dome into that. And then when these are glued, I actually press this bottom, the bottom of the guitar onto the dome dish and have some sticks, it's known as a go bar deck, sticks that sit down and press the brace onto there while it's glued. And then when I finally get to the stage, you saw an open guitar before without the back, I'll actually turn the back upside down on my sandpaper and sand in the dome into that as well. So when this is glued onto it, it's pulled completely into a dome in all dimensions. So that's how we do that. And the tops are done in exactly the same way. It's just that the dome in those is a lot more subtle. But those at the front can certainly see this thing's teetering on quite a radius. So I'm able to now lighten up those braces probably more than I normally would have been able to. Seeing the unseen. These images have been pinched from the University of New South Wales website. Thank you very much for those. And this is using Chladni patterns. So we throw a bit of sand on top of the guitar top, and where it collects is a node point where there's no movement. And you can start to investigate what is the frequency response of your guitar top. This is done by a lot of manufacturers as part of their manufacturing process. I'm personally not interested in that at all, but it's a very interesting exercise if you do look at the response of a guitar top. Note also this is a free top. It's not been fixed to the sides of the guitar yet, so obviously that would be a completely different response altogether. 77 Hertz, this is around the bass E frequency of a guitar. And this one is quite low and got a little bit of that monopole activity in as well as some of that cross dipole activity, which is a good thing. As the frequency gets increased, you can start to see more and more complex patterns. The first few seem to stay about the same. And now we see the soundboard breaking up in all sorts of weird ways. Remember, the bracing system's not symmetrical underneath, and that's controlling a lot of what you're seeing here. About there, I think it's a bit lower, is that frequency, the high E string on a guitar. So that's what the top's doing and vibrating, similar to that, I guess. And as you keep sweeping through these frequencies, you can see the top's breaking up into more and more areas where there's nodes. It's a pretty crazy one, isn't it? Look at that. Okay, so that's what the guitar top, I guess, in some ways is doing. It's just like the string breaking up into higher and higher modes of those dipoles as the frequency gets higher, the frequency that's driving them. So we talked a little bit before about kerfed lining. We had a little bit of a look at them on the proboscope inside the guitar. Here's the guitar with the back off and those linings exposed. I was told this by a guy in America. I went to Santa Cruz Guitar Company, and the president was very, very kind and gave Glenn Lawson and myself a personal tour of his factory. He'd sat down at the end of that and I guess had a quick brain dump of some of his philosophy to me, and this is the one that resonates and has absolutely stuck with me ever since as being a true thing. He used basswood for his linings of the guitar. And I asked him why, and he said, well, basswood has no preferred grain direction. You can't really cleave or split basswood. It's a very interesting wood that way. And he said, if you use the basswood for the linings, you'll actually isolate the top and the back from the sides of the instrument. So you should get minimum vibration of the sides, but the back and the front will act more like a drum. And he suggested I try and concentrate on tuning those back and top plates to each other so that they'll actually enhance what each other does. And I've certainly found, and by playing his guitars, that is a very, very true thing. The majority of manufacturers still use mahogany linings. They couple the sides, and so the energy budget you put in with your strings is a bit lossy around the sides. Guitar players appreciate that a lot because they can get some of the sound that they're producing radiating to them instead of going out and being wasted on their audience. Right? What would you want to do that for? And this concept's been taken a lot further nowadays, that people are actually cutting sound ports into the top sides of the guitar so the player themselves can hear that music. To me, that's a little bit odd, and I certainly don't go for those types of things. It's very much defacing a lovely looking instrument, and I would never put a sound port in my guitars at all. So the basswood linings here, their function is to isolate the vibrations at the top. So the vibrations can only get to the back now through the interaction of the airspace in between, rather than through the sides, primarily. So the role of the back, very, very important. The back is a little bit like, imagine an athlete on a trampoline. They can start boinging away, and what they do with their legs to get the maximum jump is very much in harmony with the resonance of the trampoline. But if you've seen these Olympic people, once they've done their time or their amount of tricks, they can stop themselves instantly by putting their legs at a different resonant frequency and just stop instantly. This is exactly the function of a back on a guitar. So the top will be being driven by the strings, vibrating away happily, nicely isolated by the basswood linings. And if the back is in sync with that motion, it will keep that motion going and enhance the sustain of the instrument. And this is something for those, possibly there's a few guitar players around here today that own a guitar. You can test this for yourself. So here's a back Queensland maple. It's nice to promote our local species. You can tap these things and get a sense of its resonance. That's one way to test the back. But a really good way is to play the guitar with it against your ample girth, if you want, and then play it a little bit further away and see if there's any difference in the sound. And probably a nicer way to do that, and just hook my leg up somehow, is if I just tap the top rather than play it. So I'll tap it without against my body and with. This guitar maker knows what he's doing. He's made that back really a part of the sound. And that's an important point. If someone wants a guitar that they want to strum in, say, a rock setting, a rock band, they'll put a strap on this thing and they'll be standing up and be playing it like that. So they're missing out on all those frequencies. So if I'm designing a guitar for a player like that, I won't bother too much about the back. The back might be aesthetically pleasing, but it's certainly not going to help and enhance the sound. So the difference in playing with it against me and away. So we just got a lot rounder tone and much more muted. And you can test a number of guitars with that. So here's a mahogany back. This is African mahogany, so it's a bit of a substitute for the normal mahogany. Once again, a great report. Fantastic. And you can try a similar thing with this guitar. So I'll just do the tap. Take note of that name. This guy really does know what he's doing, doesn't he? All right, and the last wood here, this one's probably the most striking. This is in sound as well as looks, I guess. This is Tasmanian blackwood, which also occurs in the Australian mainland. This is actually fiddleback, so it's quite fancy. But that has a very, very good tap tone, extraordinarily good stiffness to weight, so it makes a great back material. And similarly, if we just tap that one, virtually dead without it, this particular guitar. And this one has very much been designed with that in mind. So this is what we'd call a fingerstyle guitar. This is one that's meant to be played on the knee away from the body. Whereas something, and I don't really have a good example of that, but I guess the best example I have would probably be this one here with Queensland maple back and sides. It's what I'd call a rib tickler. So the guy would be standing up and having it against their body as they play the guitar. Okay, bracing patterns in backs are a little boring. What we'll try and do is enhance the long dipole, and so primarily these are the bracing schemes that prevail. I used to slavishly copy what we see on all old guitars and put 4 braces across here, but this is one of the small body models, and I realised you didn't need as much stiffness in these, and so I've now gone to a 3-brace system. And these will be carved away just like I do to the top braces to try and get the most resonance I can out of the back. So that's part of the guitar sound. So apart from looks on a guitar back, it's very much a part of the sound as the top whiz. Scale length. There's not much variation in scale lengths of guitars. Historic guitars, why did I bring this thing along? Historic guitars were these kind of things. It isn't a lute. It's actually an oud from the Middle East, but it's very, very similar to a lute, and it's the only thing I've got to illustrate this. This was what was used in the olden days, the old times. They were strung with gut strings, and they have a particular kind of bridge here. The bridge is actually technically very boring, and not much thought put into that. There was a rule of thumb that you put it, I think it was 1/9 the distance of the whole top along here. This particular one certainly isn't that. But that's not a great place to put the bridge at all if you want maximum monopole activity on a guitar body or any musical instrument. So these things are really a quiet instrument. They were meant to be played in small rooms, ensembles, in very, very quiet settings. So this is a really inefficient machine, very, very inefficient, strung with gut, and the scale lengths on these were quite short. So they're a very quiet instrument for a reason. And as modern times went on and we got to raucous bars and things and people wanted to be heard, the scale length sort of standardised, and I have gone metric here, although I can't think of that in my brain, 61 and 66 centimetres. It's, the most common scale is 25.4 inch. It was standardised by the Martin Guitar Company in America. The steel string guitar is primarily an American instrument. It was born over there. And a shorter scale guitar, 24.9 inches is commonly used, and Gibson Guitar Company quite often uses those shorter guitar scales as well. What would the difference be? A musician would know instantly. If strung with exactly the same strings, the long guitar is going to have more string tension. Because it's got more string tension, the middle of the string is going to vibrate and buzz on the frets, and so there's going to have a little bit more clearance between the fretboard. So the action, or the height of the strings, is going to have to be a little bit higher above the soundboard. There's going to be a lot less energy to move the soundboard. Just lightly strum that thing and you'll get a lot of energy put into the soundboard from the longer string. It definitely has a more resonant sound, and by that I guess I'm talking about more fundamental in the string itself. It's going to be stronger, and therefore it's going to have a better bass response than a short scale guitar. I did bring a short scale guitar along. My daughters were very lucky when they were 5. They got a guitar each, and this is my first daughter's guitar. And this is an extremely short scale guitar, because she's a very, very short scale person when she was 5, right? Sadly, she's grown up and this is a bit of a small thing. But short scale guitars lack a lot of bass response. Not much bass response, but what they do have is a really sweet treble. And back to the basses, which are very weak again. There's another reason you'll see shortly why this has a fairly weak bass response, but that's what a short scale guitar is like. It's very tinny, there's no doubt about that, but you won't get treble sounding like that on a normal sized guitar with a normal scale. Okay, we'll get something with a longer scale now. There's rhyme and reason why I brought everything along today, I think. So this is a tambour from northern India. Quite a long scale length, you'd have to admit. And the good thing about this is rather than getting a bass guitar, which is obviously strung with big thick rope strings, played by Neanderthal types, this one's a little more subtle with very thin strings. And this is used as a backing for the vocalist in Indian music. And with very little energy, the strings just keep going forever. Quite nice to annoy your spouse with. This has been a... Look forward to her trips to Sydney so I can play this thing. And so, tiny amounts of energy in here in actually a very inefficient sound box. The thing is a pumpkin. Right? They've got a pumpkin and they've stuck a big heavy piece of rosewood on with a big heavy stiff arch on it, and they've just pressed the bridge against it in violin style here. So it's an extremely inefficient generator of sound, but still with a long string, you're still able to get these lovely sustaining notes out of the thing. Feel free to sing along if you want to. Okay, getting to the last few points now. Intonation is a critical aspect of making guitars. If you don't get this right, your musician's going to throw the guitar back at you and say, what did you make this piece of rubbish for? This is another classic for slavishly copying designs, which you might get from perhaps nowadays Chinese factories, but historically perhaps Korean, and then before that Japanese factories, just simply grabbing a guitar from the West, copying every part of its design and trying to sell that out to the public. They didn't know why the intonation was an issue. They didn't know why we have on this bridge here a little slant on the saddle. I'm not sure if that's perceptible in that picture. But thicker strings are far stiffer than the thinner strings. And on a guitar, the thinner string is at the bottom and they progressively get thicker as you go up to the bass strings. And so they all flex a different amount. The nice slinky thin strings, they can pretty much vibrate along their ends as they're fixed. But if you get a heavy bass string and try and fix it at the two ends, it doesn't actually vibrate along its whole length. It can't. Because of the stiffness inherent in the material, the very, very ends of the string are actually held quite stiffly there. And progressively that relaxes as you go into the centre of the string. So there's dead points in the string that are actually what you would think be actively vibrating, they're not vibrating at all. And as you progressively go to thicker strings, this becomes more of a problem. And so rather than slavishly copying the designs that you see on historic guitars, you should be measuring these things. And so we start to slant the saddle on the bridge here by a very precise amount. And go even further than that, that you would carve the shape of this piece of bone on there to accommodate different gauges or styles of strings so that they would intonate correctly. And that's quite important that we get that right, that the guitar would intonate. The way it's done, it's not rocket science. You get a tuner out, you play a note, and you play the octave of the note and see if they're the same. And the octave should be the same as the original fundamental note. And an easy way for you guys to hear that, I guess, is if I play an open chord down here and then play the same open chord up here. And it's very much in sync and in harmony with those open strings. We can hear that. Once again, what can I say? This guy's got the right idea there. So he's got the intonation right on that particular guitar. And that's not done by ear. I'm not trained to hear tones by ear. I do that with a strobe tuner. And that's a big part of, I guess, the dollars I've made over the years is in setting up people's guitars from cheap copies and turning them into something that actually works musically. So that's a very common thing to do. Most importantly, the bridge. We're getting now to the final aspects of all of these things. This is just, the importance of this can't be understated. It really is the thing that connects the strings to the whole guitar body, and so its height, weight, type of wood, amount of flex are very, very important to the overall tone of the guitar and how that then interacts with the rest of the guitar. It is the most important brace, and luckily for us we can see it, it's on the outside. The best place to put the bridge is right in the centre of the guitar. If you put it in the centre, you're going to get good monopole action. You're going to get the thing going in and out. And we can illustrate that with a little wind-up toy box here. Does anyone have a birthday today at all? No, had one this week at all? All right, we just got a little song for you. This goes out to you. Lovely. Okay, so that's the mechanism itself. Doesn't make much sound at all. I put it inside this box, it makes a little bit more sound. But what about if we stuck it on the bridge of a guitar that has its back supported up, and we stuck it where the bridge location was? Wow. Fantastic. Hip hip. We could also try sticking this on the edge of the guitar. Why don't I stick the bridge over here? Well, this guy's got a nice resonant guitar. It's supposed to be quite tinny and trebly. Nowhere near probably as resonant as we'd find right in the centre here in the bridge. So it's an obvious place to put the bridge, and its placement is quite critical to getting that monopole mode going on a guitar. Here's a few guitars I've made, and one we just played earlier, the short scale guitar. Look where I've put the bridge, and I told you there'd be something about why the bass frequency of this particular guitar is not great. This instrument was constrained by its player, who had tiny little hands, and they have to be able to put their hands around here and actually physically be able to hold it, and I can't stretch the neck right out there, which would then pull the bridge into the correct position, because the neck would fall forward on the thing. So the whole design of this guitar, I knew from the outset wasn't going to be the most efficient design, but it was something they could at least play and get started on, if only she would. The next one along, not sure if we bought that, yeah we did. The next one along was the next daughter's guitar. The first one of course complains that hers was smaller, this one's bigger and better apparently. And the bridge placement here is wrong again. It's completely wrong to get the best bass sound out of that. It's not bad, but it's not very resonant compared to the larger body guitars with the bridge in the centre. This again was constrained by the player. If I stretched that neck out by another 2 frets, then the guitar would fall forward, and she's not strong enough to play a guitar like that. But I do have every guitar for me as a point on the graph, and we can see the one on the right hand side was made for a friend last year for his daughter. I very quickly realised it wasn't for his daughter at all, because he'd asked for a full width neck, which she wouldn't be able to play. It was for him. So it was a great excuse to get another guitar under the radar of his wife and built pretty much to what he wanted. So this then allowed me to do another point on the graph. What about if I stretched this by another 2 frets and had the body join here? Exactly the same body shape. And exactly the same body shape as our friend Bob Coleman's guitar is made as. And this is how Bob's guitar is going to be made. So his bridge is going to be put in the centre by pulling this whole scale up a little bit and stretching the neck out of the body. And then that will place the bridge where it should be for great sound. I'm going to put that one. The bridge and saddle is how the loading of the strings gets dumped on down to the soundboard. So I can't really quantify what you do here. It's a feel that I've got, and it's a feel that I've got over making a number of instruments, which really is the way you start to get a handle on how these parameters affect the tone of the guitar. And you can tell if you had a really high saddle, some people do this, they put a really high saddle on, it dumps a lot of force on the guitar and makes it very loud for usually a short period of time. And over the months, the strain on that will eventually bow and buckle the soundboard down. Another trick, and a trick that the people who slavishly copy guitars aren't aware of and don't put on their guitars, is there's a little relief slot cut so that the string here can come down without having that saddle up too high. And you should cut these little relief slots in very accurately and specifically to what you've known works before, and that's another way of dumping a little bit more force down onto the guitar top without having the bridge and saddle too high up. Finally, the finish is just about the finish. When you put all these things together, you then spray it to protect the wood against knocks, beer, whatever you might be getting onto the instrument, but also you're protecting it against rapid moisture changes. That's the worst thing you could ever do to wood. How stressful was I bringing this collection over here today? It couldn't stay in my car at all, so I had to go back into the office and back out into the car again. Modern lacquers have got to be applied as thin as possible. Factory guitars like durable instruments and spray a great big thick coating right over the top of their instruments and kill all of that wonderful tone off. They're quite happy to do that. The old traditional shellacs and French polishes has an extraordinarily thin finish, and that is the best one you could ever possibly use. I don't use it because it basically is very, very, it's easy to wear. Alcohol will dissolve it, not that you ever do spill alcohol on these things, but alcohol will dissolve it, and even heat on that thing will affect the shellac. So really it's not a great modern finish, and so my lacquers I use are as thin as I can to still get a nice polish onto the guitar. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry about the gratuitous advertising, but I do have cards up here, and you're welcome later to come and look at the instruments. Could I ask, please, if you could just ask me first before you play any of these things? A lot of these haven't been sold yet, and some are belonging to people, so if you could respect that, that'd be great. Well, do you have time? Absolutely, I do.
4 minutes.
Make it snappy, yes.
What adhesive do you use?
What adhesive? I use aliphatic resin, and also some of the joins actually on a guitar for future, and I look ahead, need to be repaired, and so I'll use animal hide glue, the old traditional animal hide. And that's a very, very strong glue. Yep, that's right, yep. And both those glues are stronger than the wood itself. Yep.
I was just interested in the effect of age on instruments.
Yep.
I know there's been a great debate about whether it's true or not. I just wanted your take on that.
Well, it is true. There's a product came out this year, in fact, that sits over your strings and has an oscillating electromagnetic field in it. So when you're not playing your guitar, it sits there and sort of plays it for you. And it's well known that that will break in a new guitar. So that's a product specifically aimed at luthiers to get a guitar to break in. And so old guitars absolutely are the go. It's really hard to get these things to be 80 years old right now, so the best thing is to sell them and play the hell out of the things. It'd be the best way to do that. Yep.
There's a Dobro resonator guitar.
That's right.
So what's that promoting? The Monopole?
No, I thought I had an idea to promote something with it. This was actually my very first guitar I made, and I guess the reason I made that was all I had to do was get the bridge location in the right spot for the scale length. The frets are in there, but they're not actually played because this is played with a slide. And so I guess I was thinking this might illustrate that you can use other things other than wood as a vibrating device as well. So this uses a very thin aluminium diaphragm underneath this heavy chrome cover here. Yep. Sorry I didn't play that one earlier. Yeah.
Have you ever tried making necks with frets different spacing, like for different frequencies?
Yeah, I did. That's what I did with this guy. So you can pretty much choose any frequency you want to out of this guy because we're using a slide. So we can use half tones, quarter tones, and all that style of thing. With fretting, no, we don't. Usually we fret an instrument so that's in the diatonic Western scale. So not as yet.
I have a naive question.
Naive question, I like them.
Naive. I suppose wood is central to the guitars
Sure.
that you make. What about electric guitars? Do you need wood?
Yeah, indeed. Electric guitar, typically 3 pieces of wood. Some people might correct me, there might be 4 if they're capped with a particular exotic species. They have the body wood, the neck wood, and then the wood that would clamp on top of the neck would be the fretboard. So they have very minimum wood, but yeah, the type of wood and the body does definitely change the character of the guitar.
I've seen electric guitars made from plastics.
You can as well, but they have a particular tone and quite a nasally tone to them. Whereas the nice woods are older, or even the bass wood that I was talked about earlier, make really good guitar bodies as well. And mahogany's a nice one too. So it's the same basic principles apply, although we're talking about the dark side here of electric guitar making. So I have forayed into the dark side, but only as personal instruments for myself.
Any more? Yeah.
Ming.
We'll take the last question.
What's the use of the cutaway? Is that just an aesthetic thing, or is that...
No, the thing about playing in the modern styles is people want to have access to the frets up here. Why would you bother fretting up there if you can't get your little mitts up into there? And so the idea being you put a cutaway there, and obviously you can see that would facilitate your hand going right up to the top there.
Does that compromise the acoustics, Bonnie?
This part of the guitar top, if we have a bit of a tap around, then we go down to the bridge. You can see this is quite an inactive spot, but what it does do is it reduces the air volume, and the air volume, usually around this area here, is responsible for that Helmholtz resonation. So it doesn't really affect it that much, but I notice it does have a slight effect, but certainly not enough to say I don't want to have a cutaway because of that. It's really more aesthetic, I guess, and access to these frets up here. Yep.
Okay, thank you all for turning up. We have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Yep.
Let's